The small rural town in Ohio welcomes the beautiful season of autumn foliage at the end of October. However, for Emily Hartman this year, there was no time to appreciate that beauty. In her hand, she clutched a phone message informing her of her grandfather George's death. For her, living alone in a New York apartment and making a living as a freelance writer, returning home was something she hadn't done in 3 years. The Ohio landscape viewed from the airplane window looked different from the warm place in her memories. When Emily landed at Columbus Airport, complex emotions swirled in her chest. Grief over losing her beloved grandfather mixed with anxiety about reuniting with family she'd been estranged from for 3 years. The Hartman family was well known in this town. Her father Michael ran a medium-sized construction company locally. He was meticulous and honest by nature, but held expectations for his children that were almost too strict. Her mother Linda participated enthusiastically in the town's women's club and church activities, and was respected by neighbors as an exemplary housewife. However, she always cast a critical eye toward her daughter Emily. Emily had a younger brother named Jason. He joined his father's company immediately after college graduation and was expected to take over the business someday. He was his parents' pride and joy, and was regarded by townspeople as a solid young man. In contrast to Emily, Jason was a son who continued to meet his parents' expectations. And the family member who loved Emily most was her grandmother Margaret. Even after losing her husband, she continued living independently with remarkable vitality. With her white hair carefully arranged and always maintaining an elegant appearance, grandmother was Emily's only confidant. Emily's childhood joy was spending every weekend at her grandparents' house. Grandfather George was a former high school teacher who, after retirement, spent his time reading and gardening. Though not tall, he had dignity and showed special affection for his granddaughter Emily. In grandfather's study was a bookshelf packed with old books, where Emily would listen to various stories from her grandfather. "Emily, what's truly important isn't what people think of you, but how you choose to live your life," grandfather would often say while gently stroking his granddaughter's head. The life lessons Emily learned from her grandfather became the foundation of her values. However, starting with her college enrollment, her relationship with family gradually deteriorated. When Emily declared she would major in journalism and pursue a writing career after graduation, her parents' disappointment was unmistakable. Her father raged, "You'll never be able to make a living with such an unstable job," and her mother lamented, "I can't face the neighbors." "Having a daughter who's a freelance writer is too embarrassing to tell people," were words her mother Linda often spoke. Emily couldn't meet her parents' expectations of having a career they could boast about to the townspeople. The family rift deepened with each passing year. After Emily moved to New York and began living independently, contact became less frequent. Phone calls from her parents invariably began with lectures about, "When will you get a serious job?" and Emily gradually became reluctant to answer the phone. The only saving grace was that her grandparents continued to love Emily unchanged. Grandfather occasionally sent letters, reading Emily's articles and praising them as wonderful. However, caught up in busyness, Emily also began to feel distant from her hometown. During her last visit home 3 years ago, Emily had a fierce argument with her parents. Her mother's words, "You are the family's shame," still pierce Emily's heart today. Since then, Emily had not set foot on her hometown soil. Receiving news of her grandfather's death, Emily traced the path home with complex emotions. A final farewell to her beloved grandfather and a reunion with family she'd been estranged from for 3 years. Would she really be welcomed warmly? The familiar scenery visible from the car window brought both nostalgia and anxiety to Emily's heart. While driving the rental car, Emily stopped in front of her family home. The 2-story white house stood unchanged from her memories, but somehow looked cold. When she pressed the doorbell, her mother Linda appeared. Her mother looked thinner than before, her expression hard. "Why did you come?" Linda's first words were not welcome but bewilderment. Showing up suddenly without any contact. "I heard grandfather passed away. I wanted to say my final goodbye," Emily answered quietly. Linda remained standing at the entrance, making no move to invite her daughter inside. "Your father and Jason are at the funeral home. They're busy preparing for tomorrow. If there's anything I can help with." Nothing in particular. You wouldn't understand, but funeral preparations are very demanding. Linda's words carried anger over 3 years of silence. Emily nodded slightly and followed her mother into the house. The living room was as orderly as before, but somehow lacked vitality. In the evening, Father Michael and Jason returned home. Father had more gray hair, and fatigue was deeply etched on his face. Seeing Emily, he showed a complex expression. Emily. It's been 3 years, Father's voice was flat, as if suppressing emotion. Dad. I'm sorry about Grandfather. I see, Michael answered briefly and slumped onto the sofa. I'm exhausted from funeral preparations. Brother Jason only waved lightly at Emily before immediately going up to his room. Though they'd once been close siblings, now there was a distance between them like strangers. At the dinner table, family conversations centered mainly on funeral arrangements and associated costs. When Emily tried to interject, the topic quickly turned in directions that excluded her. By the way, Michael said while setting down his fork, regarding father-in-law's estate, the meeting with the lawyer is scheduled for next week. Estate? When Emily asked in surprise, Linda shot her a cold look. That's none of your concern. Someone who hasn't shown their face for 3 years, do you think you have the right to interfere in family finances now? That's not what I meant. The company's cash flow is tight, Michael sighed. I was hoping father-in-law's assets might help the company a little. 20 employees' livelihoods depend on it. Jason also spoke up. I was planning to buy a new house too. I need a down payment. Emily listened silently to her family's conversation. She felt uncomfortable that talk of inheritance took precedence over words mourning grandfather's death. After dinner, Emily decided to visit her grandmother's room. When she knocked on the room at the back of the second floor, a weak voice answered, "Come in." Entering the room, she found Grandmother Margaret sitting in a small chair, knitting. Seeing Emily, tears welled up in Grandmother's eyes. Emily. You really came. Grandmother stood up and embraced Emily firmly. In that warm embrace, Emily's tears also overflowed. Grandma. I'm so sorry about Grandfather. Thank you, Emily. George would surely be happy that you came. Grandmother wiped her tears and had Emily sit in a chair. What do you think of how your father and mother have been treating George lately? Emily shook her head. Grandmother's expression clouded. Since he became ill, they never once tried to listen to George. Even when visiting him, it was always talk about inheritance. Grandpa, have you finished organizing your assets? Where are the bank account books? That's all they talked about. Grandmother's voice trembled with sadness. But you were different. You sent letters, called. George always said, Emily is a special child. The last time I heard from Grandfather was 6 months ago. I should have contacted him more frequently. No, Emily. You did plenty. George understood. He knew that even while busy, you cherished us in your heart. Grandmother took out an old album and showed Emily pictures of her and Grandfather from long ago. Photos of them planting flowers together in the garden, of her being read to, of opening presents on Christmas morning. In every photo, Grandfather and Emily were smiling happily. George worried about you until the end. Emily is working hard alone in New York, but I wonder if she gets lonely sometimes. Emily felt her chest tighten. To think Grandfather had been concerned about her until the very end. Late that night, when the family gathered in the first-floor dining room, Michael spoke gravely. About tomorrow's funeral, we've decided to make it a small ceremony with only relatives, Father said, looking directly at his daughter. Emily, you don't need to come. Emily couldn't believe her ears. What? Not contacting us for 3 years, then showing up the moment Grandfather dies? That's too convenient. You're no longer family. Dad, that's too cruel, Emily protested desperately. Cruel? Linda interjected. You're the cruel one. Abandoning your family and selfishly running off to New York, not caring about your parents' worries. Jason also sided with Father. Sis, we were there caring for grandfather until his final moments. I don't think you have that right. Then, grandmother's voice came from the stairs. What are you all talking about so loudly? Margaret slowly descended the stairs. Sensing the family's tense atmosphere, grandmother frowned. Emily is family too. She has the right to attend the funeral, grandmother said resolutely. Mother-in-law, this is our family matter, Linda objected. What's wrong with George's granddaughter attending his funeral? Michael stubbornly shook his head. Someone who's been out of contact for 3 years can't suddenly act like family now. Please don't come tomorrow. Grandmother looked at Emily with a sad expression. Emily stood up, holding back tears. Fine. I don't intend to be a nuisance. Emily headed for the guest room upstairs. In the hallway, grandmother followed her. Emily, don't give up. You have the right to attend. Grandma, I don't want to disturb the family's peace. Family peace? Grandmother shook her head. What's peaceful about this? Excluding the granddaughter George loved most from his funeral? Grandmother took Emily's hand. Come with me tomorrow. I'll handle it somehow. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. Outside the window, autumn wind swayed the trees, making a somehow lonely sound. Memories with grandfather came flooding back one after another, and the reality that she'd never see him again weighed heavily on her. Tomorrow was supposed to be the final farewell to grandfather. However, rejected by her family, would Emily be able to pay her final respects to grandfather? Whether she had the courage to go to the funeral home tomorrow, trusting in grandmother's words, Emily spent a long night. The October morning was chilly, with gray clouds covering the sky. Emily greeted the morning having barely slept the night before. Her face reflected in the mirror was pale with fatigue, with dark circles under her eyes. Still, she carefully dressed in a black dress and arranged her hair. She wanted to present herself as properly as possible to show final respect to grandfather. At the flower shop, she purchased a bouquet of white lilies. They were grandfather's most beloved flowers while alive. The image of grandfather tending to lilies in the garden floated vividly in Emily's mind. Lilies are symbols of purity, Emily. Like flowers, it's important for people to keep their hearts clean, she could almost hear grandfather's gentle voice. When she parked at St. Michael's Church parking lot, Emily's hands were trembling. Her father's words from last night wouldn't leave her mind. Still, trusting grandmother Margaret's words, I'll handle it somehow, Emily got out of the car. At the church entrance, many mourners had already gathered. As a former high school teacher, grandfather was respected in the community, and many students and neighbors had come. Emily took a deep breath and headed toward the entrance, holding white lilies to her chest. However, at the church door, Father Michael and Mother Linda stood blocking her way. Their expressions were even sterner than last night, arms crossed like gatekeepers. Emily, do you remember what I said last night? Father's voice was low and intimidating. Dad, I just want to say goodbye to grandfather. You're not family, Mother Linda said coldly. You can't enter. Those words froze Emily's heart like ice. She could tell that surrounding mourners were looking their way with confused expressions. Former classmates and neighbors watched the Hartman family drama with interest. I'm also a grandchild, Emily pleaded with a trembling voice. I loved grandfather. Please let me say my final goodbye. Loved? Michael said mockingly. Someone who didn't contact us for 3 years suddenly acting like family when grandfather dies is too convenient. Where were you when grandfather was on his deathbed? You were in New York living your selfish life. But, No excuses, Linda interrupted. Your being here would prevent George's soul from resting peacefully. Go home. Emily stood frozen like a statue, still clutching the white lilies she'd brought for grandfather. Her feet wouldn't move. No words came out. It was like being in a nightmare. The murmuring of mourners grew louder. Isn't that Emily? Why can't she enter? Is it a family problem? Such voices could be heard. Please, Emily made a final plea. Let me offer these flowers to grandfather. That's all I ask. No, Michael's response was merciless. You don't have that right. At that moment, grandmother Margaret appeared from inside the church in a wheelchair. Brother Jason was pushing the wheelchair, but grandmother's expression differed from her usual gentleness, it was resolute. Grandmother came to Emily and stood up from the wheelchair. Despite being 80 years old, her posture was straight and dignified. Leave it to me, grandmother whispered to Emily. Margaret gently took Emily's hand and stepped forward. The mourners' attention focused on grandmother. Everyone, thank you for gathering despite your busy schedules, grandmother began speaking in a clear voice. Regarding my husband George's funeral, I have a request for the officiant. May I borrow the microphone? The minister conducting the service hesitantly handed the microphone to grandmother. Grandmother took an envelope from her inner chest pocket. This is a letter my husband entrusted to me the day before he passed away. Grandmother's voice resonated through the microphone to the venue. I would like to read it before everyone. Michael and Linda's faces suddenly changed color. The two seemed to sense something and hurriedly tried to approach grandmother. Mother-in-law, that's... Linda tried to stop her, but grandmother raised her hand to restrain her. Be quiet, grandmother's voice had a severity never heard before. The venue fell completely silent. Mourners held their breath waiting for grandmother's next words. Emily also watched with bated breath. Grandmother carefully took the letter from the envelope and put on her reading glasses. Her hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady. To my beloved Margaret, grandmother began reading. There's something I absolutely must tell you before I leave this world. Michael tried to raise his voice saying, please stop, but was intimidated by the surrounding mourners' gazes, his voice becoming small. What I regret most is spoiling my son Michael too much. He's become interested only in money. For the last 2 years, Michael and Linda talked only about my assets at my sickbed. Murmurs arose in the venue. Michael and Linda paled, exchanging glances. Grandmother continued reading. Grandpa, how much money do you have in the bank? What about life insurance? Where are the property deeds? They treated me as if telling me to die quickly. Murmurs spread among the mourners. Neighbors looked at the Michael couple with surprised expressions. But only Emily was different. Grandmother's voice grew louder. She loved me purely. She sent letters, called, worried about my health. She never once talked about inheritance. Emily felt tears streaming down her cheeks. Grandfather had understood her until the very end. Emily is my true family, grandmother declared through the microphone, closing the letter. My husband's final wish was to let Emily say her final goodbye. The venue fell silent as death. Michael and Linda opened their mouths to object, but no words came out. Surrounding gazes looked at them accusingly. Grandmother took Emily's hand and led her to the church entrance. Come, Emily. Let's say goodbye to Grandpa. Emily entered the church with grandmother, her vision blurred with tears. No one tried to stop them. Mourners opened a path and saw them off with respect. Grandfather's coffin was placed at the church altar. Emily offered the white lilies beside grandfather with trembling hands. Grandpa, thank you for loving me until the end, she whispered softly, and it seemed like grandfather's gentle smile appeared. Grandmother invited Emily to the altar platform. You are the family George loved most. Speak the final words. Emily stood before the altar and looked around at the mourners. The inside of the church was wrapped in silence, everyone waiting for her words. With the scent of white lilies wafting, Emily took a deep breath. Grandfather was more than just a grandfather to me. Emily's voice trembled at first, but gradually became stronger. From childhood, grandfather taught me the most important things in life. Not money or status, but the meaning of loving people and living honestly. The people in the venue nodded deeply. Many probably received similar teachings from grandfather George. I regret being estranged from family for 3 years. But grandfather understood me until the end. Emily's voice became tearful. Today, I'm deeply grateful to be able to say final goodbye to grandfather. Warm applause arose from the mourners. Emily bowed deeply toward grandfather's coffin and descended from the altar. Grandmother Margaret took the microphone again. My husband's letter isn't finished yet. There's something more I'd like everyone to hear. Michael and Linda were pale-faced in the back. Jason also watched his parents with a confused expression. Let me continue reading. Grandmother reopened the letter. Margaret, I've decided to leave all my assets to you and Emily. Specifically, 70% to you, 30% to Emily. Murmurs arose in the venue. Michael tried to step forward but was blocked by surrounding gazes. To Michael, I leave only the company's debts. This is my final education for him. I want to teach my son, who can only understand money's value, the pain of losing money. Grandmother's voice trembled, but she tried to faithfully convey her husband's final will. To Linda, I leave nothing. Since marrying, she never once truly loved us. Always superficial relationships, interested only in our assets. Linda's face turned bright red as she stood up. How can there be such a ridiculous story? Show me the will. Grandmother answered quietly. Of course, an official will also exists. Everything will be clear at next week's meeting with the lawyer. Michael also stood up. Wasn't father-in-law senile? Such a will is invalid. My husband was normal until the very end. Grandmother's voice contained anger. You should put your hands on your hearts and think about what attitude you took toward my husband on his deathbed. The minister tried to mediate, but mourners watched the exchange with bated breath. Grandmother began reading the final part of the letter. I'm also disappointed in Jason. Under his parents' influence, he's come to pursue only financial success. However, there's still hope for him. I want him to learn life's true values while young. Jason looked confused, alternately watching his parents and Emily. Finally, beloved Margaret. Please support Emily. She is our family's hope. She will surely walk a wonderful life path. I'll watch over it from heaven. I love you eternally. From George. Grandmother folded the letter and held it to her chest. The venue was completely silent. Michael raised his voice. I can't accept such a farce. I'll take legal action. Please do, Grandmother answered resolutely. My husband completed all proper procedures. There are 3 witnesses, and a lawyer was present. Linda screamed shrilly. You conspired together to deceive us. Deceive? Grandmother sadly shook her head. We were the ones deceived. We believed you loved us. But reality was you only had money on your minds. Voices from among the mourners arose. That's right, poor George. The community people might have known about the Michael couple's recent behavior. Emily stood beside grandmother. Grandma, I'm happy about grandfather's feelings, but I don't need inheritance. No, Emily, grandmother gripped her granddaughter's hand. This is my husband's final wish. You have that right. Michael attempted final resistance. Emily, your family too. Do you think this treatment is right? Emily slowly looked at her father. Dad, this morning you told me I'm a not family. Now you're conveniently saying I'm family? Michael was at a loss for words. So was Linda. I didn't come back wanting inheritance, Emily continued. I just wanted to say goodbye to my beloved grandfather. But grandfather understood me until the end. That's enough. Grandmother stood up and spoke to the mourners. Everyone, thank you for listening for so long. This was my husband George's final will. He used to say that true family bonds aren't formed by blood relations, but by hearts connected through caring for each other. Mourners nodded deeply. Many had tears in their eyes. When the minister stepped forward to resume the funeral, Michael and Linda indignantly left the church. Jason hesitated for a moment but followed his parents. The funeral proceeded solemnly. Eulogies praising grandfather's lifetime achievements were read, and words of gratitude from former students were spoken. Emily sat in the front row with grandmother, savoring memories with grandfather. After the ceremony, many mourners came to greet Emily. Emily, I'm glad you came back, a former colleague of grandfather's said. George was always bragging about you. The teacher showed everyone articles you wrote, a former female student said tearfully. My granddaughter became a fine writer, he'd say. Emily's chest grew warm. To think grandfather was so proud of her. At the burial ceremony in the cemetery, Emily accompanied grandmother until the very end, seeing grandfather off. The Michael family didn't appear. In the evening, at grandmother's house, Emily was alone with grandmother. Grandma, thank you so much. Being able to say goodbye to grandfather today was thanks to you. Grandmother smiled. Emily, what will you do now? I'll return to New York and continue working. But this time, I'll contact you more frequently. I promise. That makes me happy, grandmother answered joyfully. But think about the inheritance. You mustn't waste George's will. Emily had complex feelings. Accepting the inheritance might deepen the rift with family further. However, it was also grandfather's final wish. That night, Emily spent time alone in grandfather's study. Familiar books lined the bookshelf, and a novel grandfather had been reading until the end lay open on the desk. Finding grandfather's diary, Emily turned through the pages. In the later pages, there were entries about herself. A letter arrived from Emily. She's doing well on her own. Even without family understanding, she has the strength to continue walking her own path. I'm proud of her. Emily wiped tears while holding the diary to her chest. Grandfather's love still warmed her heart. 6 months later, on a warm spring afternoon, Emily was visiting grandfather's grave with grandmother Margaret. New green growth sprouted around the gravestone, and white lilies Emily had planted were blooming beautifully. Legal proceedings were complicated as expected. Michael hired a lawyer to claim the will's invalidity, but due to the official will grandfather left and testimony from 3 witnesses, the court recognized the will as valid. Michael's construction company went bankrupt with debts, and the family had to sell their mansion and move to a small apartment. Emily used part of the inheritance to establish the small publishing company she'd always dreamed of, Heartwood Press. The first publication was a memoir she wrote about memories with grandfather, letters from grandfather. This book created a big response in the region and eventually became a national bestseller. This book about the meaning of true family bonds moved many readers' hearts. Emily, how happy George must be that your book is displayed in bookstores nationwide, grandmother said, placing her hand on the gravestone. It's thanks to you, Grandma. If you hadn't had the courage to read that letter that day, I wouldn't be who I am today. The two quietly offered prayers. Spring wind caressed their cheeks, and bird songs could be heard from somewhere. As they were about to leave the cemetery, 3 familiar figures could be seen walking from the distance. Michael, Linda, and Jason. All 3 were dressed more modestly than before, and the parents especially looked obviously tired. Emily hesitated for a moment. During these 6 months, there had been no contact from family. Grandmother quietly asked, "What will you do?" "Let's wait and see," Emily answered. The 3 stopped in front of the gravestone. Michael offered flowers and stood silently for a while. Linda wiped tears while seeming to murmur something softly. Eventually, Michael turned around and noticed Emily and grandmother. He approached with heavy steps. Emily, father's voice had lost its former authority and was exhausted. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," Emily answered quietly. "I'm sorry," Michael bowed his head. "I said terrible things to you. Father was right. I was only thinking about money." Linda also stepped forward. "Emily, I want to apologize too. You were right from the beginning. We were blinded by greed and lost sight of what was important." Jason had a complex expression. "Sis, I'm sorry too. But honestly, there are still parts one don't understand. Why did grandfather hate us so much?" Emily looked at her brother. "He didn't hate you. Because he loved you, he wanted you to walk the right path. We're living in an apartment now," Michael smiled wryly. "But strangely, we have more family conversations than before. Now that we're not constantly worrying about money, our hearts feel lighter. I started working at a cafe in town too, Linda continued. At first I thought it was humiliating, but I'm happy when customers say thank you. Grandmother spoke up. George's wish was for you to find true happiness. He wanted you to learn there are things more important than money. I don't expect forgiveness, Michael said. But couldn't we start over as a family? Emily thought. During these 6 months, she had learned to let go of anger and resentment. Every time she remembered grandfather's teachings, she realized the importance of forgiveness. I think it will take time, Emily answered honestly. But we might be able to build a new relationship as family. Jason showed a relieved expression. Thank you, sis. I want to change too. In the cemetery illuminated warmly by the setting sun, the 5 stood side by side in front of grandfather's grave. They might never become the same family as before. But they should be able to build new forms of bonds. Father-in-law, Linda spoke to the gravestone. Thank you for teaching us. It might be too late, but we finally understand. Emily gripped grandmother's hand. Grandmother was still healthy and vigorous, supporting Emily's new life. Grandma, Emily said softly. It's just as grandfather said. True family isn't bound by blood relations, but by hearts connected through caring for each other. Grandmother smiled. George must be happy too. That you all understand the truth. Spring wind caressed their cheeks again. Emily felt like she could see grandfather's gentle smile. After a long ordeal, new bonds were about to be born in the Hartman family. Grandfather's final teaching that questioned the meaning of true family was finally about to bloom.